My name is Marcus Foth. I'm based at Queensland University of Technology in Brisbane, Australia, and I'm very happy to be the chair for this next session. We got this time 3 speakers, and one again is done remotely. And then we have Karli Scott there and Antoine Schmitt. I think they are both here, are they? Yes, great. So we decided to, with the technical kind of challenge, to let Simon go first. And we're already in full screen mode there. So Simon Poulter has agreed to talk to us from Liverpool about Liverpool post-TLC. Over to you.
My name is Simon Poulter. I'm an artist and a curator, and I've been working with FACT for about a year now. This presentation is on behalf of myself and Mike Stubbs. Mike is the director at FACT. The presentation is called Liverpool Post-TLC. Liverpool in England is an astonishing city. It has since the 1970s undergone profound industrial decline and deprivation, making it one of the most deprived areas of the UK. Against this is a new cultural economy that has emerged with a focus in 2008 on the city as European City of Culture. Since then, stresses and strains in the UK economy have placed continuing pressure on Liverpool's cultural assets, yet the city continues to produce great artists and cultural capital. As a port city, Liverpool has always been an economic and cultural channel for resources, initially driven by the slave trade that powered the development of the industrial northern heartland of Britain. As globalisation and political unrest disrupted this position as an economic gateway, the population dwindled. At the last UK census in 2011, Liverpool had 422,000 people, down from 846,000 in the 1930s. The consequence of this depopulation has been large areas of boarded-up houses and areas of deprivation that rank among the highest in the UK. This level of dereliction and depopulation has in effect created one of the biggest regeneration programs in Europe over the last 10 years, and alongside this, an extraordinary opportunity to refashion a city for the new millennium. Looking back over 30 years, a clear political benchmark for Liverpool was the arrival of the first Thatcher government in the late 1970s. Sir Geoffrey Howe, the then UK Chancellor, urged the government to leave the city to a managed decline for fear of wasting public money on stony ground. Thatcher rejected this advice and eventually assigned Michael Heseltine as Environment Secretary to sort things out. So began Liverpool's sequence of regenerative cultural programmes. As Heseltine said, "I simply wouldn't countenance that you could say that one of England's great cities, a world city, was going into managed decline here. That would simply be unthinkable to the approach that I believe to be necessary to a very important part of our history." After riots in Toxteth, an area of Liverpool, in 1981, one of Heseltine's major moves was to initiate the 1984 Garden Festival on a derelict piece of land overlooking the River Mersey. Containerisation and heavy-handed policing stimulated unrest among the working classes and black communities of the city as unemployment continued to rise. We'll return to containerisation as an important pointer in rethinking culture in cities later. The Garden Festival was opened by Queen Elizabeth and ultimately generated over 3 million visitors to the city. As the UK economy went further into recession in the 1980s, Liverpool became synonymous with not just the Beatles, but hard left politics. Notably, the militant group, originally Revolutionary Socialist League, founded on the thinking of Leon Trotsky. Among Liverpool City Council's leaders, there was a clear aim to deploy a Trotskyist agenda through to working class emancipation and mass action against the tide of capitalism experienced under Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. In Liverpool, a city that dared to fight, Peter Taff and Tony Mulhern recount this epic battle between Liverpool's 47 councillors and the Thatcher government, culminating in the adoption of the slogan, "Better to break the law than break the poor." What is now apparent is that the focus of globalisation was stronger and more transformative than any ideological power struggle between the hard right and the hard left. At the end of the 1980s and early 1990s, Liverpool was a hollowed out, sunken place which had lost any claim to being a world city. Containerisation shifted shipping routes to other European cities, leaving large areas of dockland unused. Thatcher's government pressed on with regenerative measures and created the Merseyside Development Corporation, tasked with finding new uses for the dockland areas of Merseyside. In 1998, Tate Liverpool was opened in the refurbished Albert Dock, as you can see in this picture. As a key component of the cultural regeneration of the city at the time, the Tate of the North, as it became known, was the first time that the Tate collection had been seen outside of London. It was an immediate success and reinstated some pride and much-needed cultural capital for the city. In the 25 years since the opening of the Tate in Liverpool, the city has committed heavily to cultural regeneration as an awkward and ambivalent outcome of the persistence of political figures such as Michael Heseltine. In 2008, 20 years after this point, Liverpool became European Capital of Culture, emerging again as a world city, but this time with several major art venues, a regenerated cultural shopping area, and countless artistic spaces, promulgating installation, intervention, and participatory art projects, and not so much Trotskyism. The impact study work undertaken by the University of Liverpool, Creating an Impact, Liverpool's Experience as European Capital of Culture, is impressive at first sight. £160 million was brought in as income over the 6-year development period. 2/3 of the residents of Liverpool took part in some kind of project, and perhaps most importantly, the city acquired a more nuanced media profile over and above its previously negative image. We might suggest that this is a lot of money to change the profile of a city, but the all-important legacy is not revealed by impact studies is the very specific ecology of creatives that now inhabit the city. The city of Liverpool therefore finds itself in a strong position vis-à-vis cultural infrastructure. Talented cultural personnel, artists, and those exploring the digital economy. Countering this, it finds itself in a weak position set against a high dependency on government grant aid and competition for funds at a time when at all government levels there are diminishing resources and an increased desire to diversify income. It's not alone in this respect, as other UK cities such as Sheffield, Manchester, Glasgow and Newcastle contend public sector-based economies. A broader examination of cultural development in the context of digital citizenry and what we now call smart cities brings us to some assertions around behaviours that are desirable. We assert in this paper that technology, creativity and social interactions perform as a smart or self-aware mix in complementing a purely technocratic view of smart cities. We move on to our polemic, or manifesto, noting the above history is a force to be worked with. So we are understanding that the creative city as an emotional space where unpredictable things will inevitably occur. We are working towards a distributed but highly connected core layer of successful interactions, transferring knowledge, curators, academics, health workers, economic development people, teachers, etc. In elucidating the above, we are noting that for cities such as Liverpool, there is everything to play for, quite literally. It's a city where it's possible to get people talking and doing. An example might be using traffic light systems for educational work with schools, or Richard Wilson's kinetic work turning the place over, which you can see in this slide, repurposing a redundant building. The city is then performed back to itself, and temporary artworks become as common as lampposts. In this respect, we argue for an increased occupation of social and digital spaces by the artistic milieu, augmenting daily lives and aspirations, tending away from the corporate mode. In summarising a history lesson and a manifesto, the next step for an organisation like FACT is to extemporise the unfolding connection between art, technology and social change and the city. It must avoid the temptation to be all things to everyone, playing to its strengths, being bold, playful and open. The FACT Centre in Liverpool will be 10 years old this year, and we invite you to join us. Thanks for listening to this slightly two-part talk, Liverpool Post TLC. And I'm Simon Poulter, and this talk is on behalf of myself and Mike Stubbs at FACT.
All right, so Karli's going to talk about quantifying social capital in digital urbanism.
Hello. Thank you for this opportunity. First I want to start off with a quick recap of social capital, since some of us have heard of it, most of us know it very well, but just as a quick recap for us all, our good friend Robert Putnam with the most contemporary idea of social capital being the connection of people to create social norms in communities and having a collaborative understanding. And so I've used this idea and sort of broken it apart to have these two main ideas. One being the positive influence you have from social capital and the positive communities that are happening. And then there's also the other side of it, which is the negative social capital, which I interpret to be the clusters of negative activity that could be neighborhoods, because they function and have their own norms, but they don't necessarily have good repercussions for others who trespass in their territory. So the results of which are vacant lots and as many other issues, including crime. So I wanted to delve into an idea in which you could analyze the social activities in a city, understanding how influential a place can be based upon its digital influence. Because nowadays, when people are moving into cities or coming into them for the first time, they're getting a grasp of a place through its digital interface most of the time. I mean, mobile communication is so ubiquitous at this point that people are checking into Foursquare trying to see what cafe is nearby. So it's a matter of understanding how well can this area boost itself in that case for visitors and for locals alike. So using Rochester's downtown center of High Falls, I did this on a small scale of understanding this plan. And so just as a quick context, this is the center of Rochester, New York. Here we have the Eastman Kodak Tower, and we have the Genesee Brewery. So if you've ever had that's where it's from. So this was a major base for industrial processes at the boom of the Erie Canal. And so at this point here, this was a very major flour milling point. And so it was very important to the development of the city as a whole. And nowadays, there's significant vacant lots, as you can see, colored in orange, most of which are industrial properties that are no longer in use. Some are still privately owned, and some are owned by the city. So as you can see, it's a gorgeous setting, and that was an interesting dynamic that I wanted to choose, where you can have a variety of conditions that could emulate a city as a whole that this process could be used for. So this is an old energy station that now sits empty completely on this site and completely deters tourists from staying in this area, even though the waterfalls are quite beautiful and there are businesses that are specifically there for that. So the first step is analyzing community organizations. Who's there and what is their influence? And I use Foursquare check-ins, Facebook likes, and I try to get an understanding of the ratios of people who are returning visitors to a place rather than people who were there only once. And the thought behind this was that people who return more often are going to have, the place is going to have a better impact in the community, because it means it is a place where people are constantly interacting and it is developing a sense of neighborhood and community. In the case of businesses, I wanted to continue that use of Foursquare, but also add in Yelp, because we have this opportunity for people to review places that they've been to, as well as give recommendations. And so the more reviewers that you have and the better the score, the better, versus 4 reviewers for a 2-star score. So it can go either way, but I wanted to use this to the place's benefit rather than not. Public spaces and parks using Foursquare information and geocaches, because geocaching is an interesting digital network that actually has a physical manifestation where people are getting outside, and it gives them an opportunity to be in a new place and potentially stay there. The whole point of people to use geocaching is to explore new areas, and many users are very implicit in their want to see new places around their neighborhood. So if you live maybe a couple blocks away, you would want to spend some time exploring a place that you've sort of passed by, but in a new way. So there are geocaches on the site, which was a nice surprise to see, because it also has a regional pull for people to come in, so there's another context for this locality. And soon, now turning to the negative side of understanding places, crime. Luckily, Rochester maps all of its crime events by its type, and you can find most of it on Crime Mapping or Spot Crime. There are so many websites that are specifically to help you understand where crime is happening in your city and to see whether or not you want to be there. The only limitation is that you have only 6 months of preview of anything that's happened. And most of the time they require you to have a subscription. So if you are adamant about knowing how you are in your neighborhood, this is helpful. And then vacant lots, which was the final piece. I wanted to measure vacant lots on 2 different ideas. One of them being their density, because more vacant lots around other vacant lots means more trouble. And it means it's harder to get developers to come in. It's hard to get people to see the potential, because even though we talk about large developments and how, oh, if you have all these parcels together, you can bring them together into a large development, really what it's saying is it's too much of an investment for most people to consider. So understanding that sort of proximity to public places where people are interested in going, and seeing how negative or how influential that field of influence can be. So through my interesting math, I was able to find very arbitrary scores for places. As you can see, there's the Center for Disability Rights, which is in this town center, which has a much higher score than anything else, even more so than the baseball field that's for the city's team, which can also say really interesting things about the benefit it has for the community if the disability rights organization has more pull. And then we have businesses. One of the issues that I found in Rochester, and specifically in this neighborhood, was that most businesses either did not exist or did not have reviews, which can show an interesting condition of whether or not there is activity happening there to warrant that. In the case of public spaces, I measured the happy visits that you can see in geocaching, as well as the geotagged photos from Instagram versus their tagged photos, a hashtag of high falls. And the problem I found with that was you can only find a very vague tag that people are using, like high falls, and use it for when they trespass into a factory, or if they are at a museum at dinner. It encompasses a lot more than just one specific place. So the crime was most interesting to map in terms of the occurrence, the multiple occurrence in one spot, because there would be certain points where there's constantly crime happening. They weren't necessarily murder, but they were significant enough to have them reoccurring, where people would obviously have the sense of no safety and not want to be there. Finally, the vacant lot score, understanding property value was an interesting value I was able to find per chance. I didn't necessarily use it towards valuing these lots, but giving an understanding of how influential they can be in terms of their ecological rating as well as their density. So ultimately what I found was we had this issue with using Instamap and Instagram, even though it's something that people are taking millions of photos of every day. A good majority of them are themselves standing in front of the waterfalls, which can be interesting because it adds a personal level. It means that people are ready to claim ownership. But there's also people tagging things that aren't necessarily in that place. So there's this odd twist where people are willing to share this information but not necessarily give you all of the context available you might want to see. One interesting condition I saw, and I had done a quick survey before finishing all of these equations, and had gotten in touch with the executive director at Rochester Roots, which is a nonprofit that specializes in urban ecology and bringing agriculture into lower income neighborhoods through the vacant lots that are there or garden space that's available. And so it's promoting health and it's promoting education for people who want to have training in the agricultural job field. And one of the things that I found in my study is that they had barely any influence or appearance in these technologies, even though they actually have 300 very current, constant members that are with them right now. And even though they're a relatively new nonprofit, it would be interesting to see how an expanded use of social media can mean more in terms of people knowing and being able to participate more so. So this final understanding of place and dynamic, seeing how we can interact with the positive and the negative and try to utilize the positive in order to offset the negative in terms of how can we get the nonprofits that are nearby to participate in fixing our vacant lots, how can we find people who are willing to occupy these places or give them some sort of ownership at a low cost. And that's it.
Hi, so I'm Antoine Schmitt, and I'm an artist, and I'm going to talk about 3 works of mine, and finishing with the one which is exhibited here in this festival, in this event. So I'm mostly dealing with usually with the movement and light, which is really my main material, and I've got some aspects of my work which really deals with the cities. So it's artworks for cities. So I'm going to talk about 3 of them. Okay, so the first one is called City Sleep Light, and the idea of City Sleep Light is to transform at night a whole building into a single light, which pulsates like the light of the power book when you close it, you know. So, which transforms the building into the sleep light of the city. So if you look at the city from far away, at night when the city goes to sleep, the light goes on and pulsates organically indicating that the city is like a big system that is sleeping and that is going to wake up. So it's very metaphorical, and it's actually quite radical and quite strong. And it has been deployed a few times. The first time it was in 2010 in 5 cities in Europe, in Berlin twice, and I'm going to show images, and in Helsinki, in Brussels, Madrid. It almost went to fact. That was talked about in Liverpool, but it didn't work. I've done it also in Lyon in 2011, and just last year in São Paulo in Brazil. And so each time it uses various technologies. So these are images of. We can see the Ars Electronica Center, Lyon here, Helsinki, Brussels, Berlin, and São Paulo down here. So I'm going to show pictures and talk a little bit. So this is a short movie. So, well, this is text talking about it. So in Berlin, it was on 2 places. It was on this gasometer, which is down there, which was being visible from very far away, and also on an art center. So this is in Ars Electronica in Linz, Ars Electronica Center. So this building was already set up with LEDs, and so I just had to plug to the existing system. So what's interesting to know is that the pulsation is very organic. So for me, it was really important that it referred to organic movement, like heartbeats and respiration. So on many places we had to set up the light system, like light projectors from inside the building or light projectors from outside the building, like in Helsinki here. The pulsation is different every night. It's different because I wanted the pulsation to be related to the state of the city, the status or the state of the city, state of mind. So I interpret the state of the city using various socioeconomic markers which I find on the net, and I change the pulsation every night slightly, not very much, but I make it like more quiet or more anxious or more stressed, depending on the state of the city. The pulse is available on internet too, so that people can also pulse on their computer, like synchronously with the building, like this. So. It's interesting to know also that actually the shape of the pulse of the MacBook Pro has been patented by Apple, and actually the period of the pulse is patented. So I didn't use this period. I used another one. Okay, so this is Ars Electronica again, and I just wanted to show because it's really nice. It was a big work. The Lyon one, which was actually this one in Lyon was a private commission from a big private real estate company, and it was a former hospital. I'm going to go far. Okay. A former child hospital, which was abandoned, and so it was really a huge building, and we lit up every window from inside. So there is one projector per window, 150 projectors, and it's on the top of a hill, and it's visible from the whole city. So it was really very beautiful. So the idea is really to relate the people to their city in a way, like to create some empathy between the people and the city, and make people feel that they are part of a big system, well, it's one of the aspects, and also it's a way for me to have people look at the city in a different way, both aesthetically because they look differently at the architecture, existing architecture, and also they can relate to the city again as a big system to which they are part of. So another artwork, which is a little bit between this one and the one which is shown here, which is an artwork. It was a public commission of last year in Antwerp, in Belgium. It's called the Bosuil Lights Quartet. Bosuil is the neighborhood in which it's going to be deployed. It's ongoing, so the project has been really designed, but it's not yet produced because it's a bit complex to administratively to convince all the landlords to do it. It's a work that is going to stay forever in this neighborhood for a public space. So the idea is it's a silent music for 4 artificial windows, like these kind of 60s or 70s buildings, you know, like housing projects. The idea is to create new windows, which we can see here. And on each building there is a window at a place which is, it looks like a real window, but it's a place which is unusual for a window. And this window lights up from inside and pulsates. So there are 4 buildings, and so 4 windows, one on each building. And they pulsate according to a generative musical score, which is visual, but it's musical structures. It's generative, so it's different forever in my schedule. So I'm going to talk about the last project, which is the project which is deployed here, which is called City Light Orchestra, and which pushes actually the concept of the previous project really far. And so the idea here is to have an open visual symphony for the windows of the city. So it's an installation for a whole city. And actually, it's totally participative, which means that the visual symphony is played by the people's window, so by the people. So people need to participate, so in order for the symphony to exist. And the way they do it is by plugging their own computer on this website, which is here, which you can do now if you are connected. And when they do so, the screen becomes white and pulsates. And so if they turn off the lights of their home and turn the screen of the computer towards the window or towards the ceiling or the wall opposite the window, then the window becomes a big pixel from outside, which pulsates in white. And so that's the idea. That's how it's really exists. So I have composed a score, and so everybody gets the score by internet, and all the voices, each window is different, but they are all synchronized through the server, which means that it's like a big choir where everybody has its own voice, but there is a global composition. There is an infinite number of voices, of tracks, and it's generative, so it's different forever, and it runs forever. There are white pulses, it's white pulses, so it's white, and it beats and flickers. It's really in between organic and musical. So I wanted it to be, if you see only one window, it really feels like there is life inside, and if you see all of them, then you can understand that there is a whole composition. So I'm going to show the videos. So there is a little bit of color because, of course, there are curtains or the wallpaper has colors. So you see the voices are not the same, but they beat in a synchronous way. So this artwork has been deployed in 3 festivals already, and this is the 4th time. There is a lot of work of communicating, of course, towards the people so that people participate. So it's a lot of work before the event, so that people really try the best ways for the lights to be seen from outside in their homes, and of course participate. So there is a communication work, and then of course we hope that people talk with each other and so on. And it works of course also on smartphones and tablets in the streets, so people can also walk around and so it's the idea here is to look at the city in a different way, to participate, and well, that's all. And tonight is going to be in Main Street, which is this way, 2 blocks away, and tonight, and especially tomorrow night, which is really the launch party.
Thank you so much. Would you like to take a seat? Okay, we've got a couple of minutes left for questions from the audience as well. I might just give you a minute to think about questions. I'll start off by asking Karli about your work. When I listened to your talk, I was reminded of the work of, for instance, Richard Florida, or a number of others that use different data sources to create indices in order to describe cities. And more recently in our own work, we've been approached by, for instance, insurance companies that are quite interested in this additional means of describing urban environments, where they already have an existing set of data, but now they feel there is this additional information that they would like to tap into and access in order, for instance, in the context of insurance companies, to create risk profiles, in the context of the police in order to create crime profiles, in the context of local governments, maybe there's ways to better describe the prospects of real estate prices going up and down, and on that basis make projections about rates and taxes. So with the work that you've been doing, have you looked at or thought about these kinds of commercial environments and players, and the relationship between your work and what might be possible?
I have thought about it, but not necessarily in that context of how cities are using it for their own understanding of commercial development in the future. But I think it would be interesting because it's so easy to grab the data, and it's bountiful. I mean, it's all over the place. But I definitely think that it can be applicable in a lot of work.
I'd like to follow up a little bit on the question of the nature of this data that you're working with. Foursquare check-ins are interesting. They generally don't indicate overall popularity of a place, but they indicate on one level that this is a place I want to tell my friends that I've been to. Right? For example, one is probably not checking into an abortion clinic. And so how does that characterization of this data change or in some way weighted in comparison to other data such as area of vacant land, number of vacant sites, and proximity? How do you deal with the discrepancies between these two different, probably qualitatively different types of information that you're looking at?
That's something I was trying to figure out in terms of religious institutions, because I know that from when I was growing up, that was where community was, and that's where everybody in school knew each other from outside and how the communities were really gathering. And from Foursquare, there are very little check-ins, and it's interesting to see how people are less willing to check into something that's habitual apart from a coffee house, which I think is interesting, and how people really are using it as a wayfinding tool rather than a stationary, a part of their recommendation within their city. But I think there are more people who are trying to develop that field, and how there are more people who are using it within their city and constantly trying to gain the mayorship, which I think is a good boast in terms of a recommendation. But I don't think we're necessarily reading it at the same level. I mean, even the popularity of check-ins are being used to give ratings to places, which Foursquare uses to recommend to people. if they come into a place. So they're already trying to aggregate that data there in order to create better recommendations for people. But I think the subculture of how people choose to use it is still something it's undetermined.
Antoine, I'm trying to find a segue to your work. There's an increasingly great number of artists that are working and are interested in data-generated artworks. I'm thinking of a lot of work, for instance, in the environmental sustainability area. For instance, works done by Natalia Jeremijenko, for instance, where she's interested in different data sources, but they are then informing and influencing the way an artwork is performed, presented, staged, and so forth. And you alluded to the fact that the actual pulsating light isn't just random, it has a certain pattern to it as well. Can you maybe expand on that a little bit, and how the shape or quality or the social circumstance of the city influence the pulsating lights?
Yeah, but actually I didn't want the pulsation to be an instrument of measure of anything. I didn't want it to be useful. I wanted just people to be able to relate in a way differently or better to the pulsation of the light depending on the city status. That's all. It was very, let's say, emotional and not useful. That was really my main goal. So the way the data is interpreted is really totally subjective, which is means by myself. I interpret it. I say, okay, today it's sunny and there is low traffic, and so everybody's happy, and it's slow pulsation. And if, on the other hand, it's storm weather and lots of traffic and air quality is really low, then I put it a bit stressed, and that's all. It's and it's not very different. It's just a little bit.
There are applications such as Sleep Tracker, which is like an iPhone application that you put under your pillow and it measures your sleeping patterns. Would you see any potential in actually using more pragmatic data in order to drive and generate the personal kind of representation of the lights in your bedroom or living room?
Well, at a personal level, you mean, for example?
Yeah, because with the version that you're presenting here in Buffalo, you mentioned that it's participatory, so different people can create their own slice of the bigger orchestra. Is that right?
Actually, yeah, why not? I mean, in the case of the symphony, it's a composition that I did, so okay, it's a creation. Okay, but it could be interesting here to create a different sense of participation and of community by having people like making public their sleep pattern. I don't know. I don't know, maybe it's not for me, maybe, but for some other artists, why not?
Then it was a more simpler version, but I looked a little bit into like breathing patterns, how they change, how we go through the different like phases while we're sleeping actually. So it was very fascinating to see your presentation, because I think there's so much potential in like such a simple thing, like just brightness changes over time. So I'm curious to maybe exchange later.
Yeah, okay.
Here.
But it's true that a pulsation is really, we are very used as humans to interpret the pulsations in other people, like the breathing patterns and the pulse rate. And we actually interpret the internal state of people a lot by this kind of pulsation. So I think pulsation is really a very simple and powerful way to get through behind this.
How do you find people react to your work without knowing what it is before you tell them what it is? Because it would be very visible, I guess, so people would see, people would know that it's actually data-driven, or that they don't know what it is, or behind it.
Yes, but well, actually, for the city sleep light, I don't know too much because I have no way of really getting to the people who see it. So it's really a bit difficult. It's very subliminal, I think, the effect. But for the City Light Orchestra, I've seen it really live, especially last time I did it 1 month ago in Cape Town in South Africa. People just walked by and it was really, they were really amazed because a whole neighborhood group really played the game, and it was really, there was really a sense of amazement, visual, and also of community. You know, all these people playing the game, it really created some kind of community sense. It's quite strong.
Yes, at the back.
I'd like to ask the gentleman in Liverpool what the future holds.
I might have to relay it to Simon. Yes, go ahead.
Just what the future holds for Liverpool, how he sees, you know, the next 10 years there, looking at what he's explained to us.
Simon, the question is about the next 10 years for Liverpool, the kind of prospects for the future.
Yeah, what are they? Yeah. Well, I don't know that I'm best positioned to say. I think Liverpool's kind of an interesting place because it does work very much from its history, which is kind of what we were thinking about in our presentation. But the major thing for Liverpool is that it's had this huge amount of investment. So really it's about how to sustain a creative economy over that period of time. So in the UK at the moment, there's a kind of huge amount of push by the government towards a US-style philanthropic model, which really is very different to you know, what we've had here. We have this kind of glorious thing called the Arts Council that actually does give money to artists to do whatever they like and has done for quite a long time, but that's really under pressure right now. So a lot of organisations like FACT are having to rethink their business models and to be more kind of objective about how to generate capital, literally. So over the next 10 years, I think what we can probably imagine will happen in the UK is that there will be a lot of interest in technology-based artistic practice. There'll be a continuing, you know, amount of work commissioned, but I think essentially we may get pushed into a US philanthropic situation where quite a lot of the infrastructure will be severely under pressure.
Simon, if I can just add to that question, you mentioned that Liverpool was the European Capital of Culture in 2008.
Yes.
Happened to go to a conference that was organized by the city of Pécs in Hungary in 2010, and Pécs was the European Capital of Culture in 2010, and so the focus of that forum was to talk about the legacy effects of being capital of culture. And there's different schemes like the Capital of Design, or the United Nations have a similar scheme administered by UNESCO about creative cities. What do you think is the value of applying to these schemes on a level of the municipality with regards to the legacy that these places or prizes present?
That's a really good question, actually. Thank you for asking that. Well, actually, Glasgow is a very good example because Glasgow actually was European Capital of Culture and also a place that was very deprived, but it has actually had a long-standing legacy of coming through with creativity and an emergence of new artworks generated. So I think you can look at somewhere like Glasgow and say, yes, it does really work. At the moment, Derry, which is in Northern Ireland, is also going through a transformation culturally. So I think although one could be quite sceptical about these kind of big schemes, I think it is demonstrably the case that actually there is a huge impact on cities. But I think the question we can ask is the degree to which that is sustained, which is, I think, what you're suggesting. And I think in some cases things don't get sustained. So an example, for instance, I live in London, obviously where the Olympic Games were held last year. They're already beginning to dismantle the site, and it's once again a building site. So I think really what is interesting to think about in the context of the debate here is what is sustainable in terms of people and activity as opposed to buildings and institutions. And you know, I think obviously that's a clear agenda.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Simon, and thank you also to our other two speakers. I think we are launching straight into the next panel. So before we do, please join me in thanking all three presenters today.